Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to tonight's webinar. My name is Sam Harwood, and I will be your host for tonight's event. Tonight's webinar is brought to you by DAF's Grazing Futures Livestock Business Resilience Program and the Leading Sheep Project. The Grazing Futures Livestock Business Resilience Program is funded through the Australian Government's Future Drought Fund and the Queensland Government's Drought and Climate Adaptation Program. While Leading Sheep is an important partnership between the Queensland Department of Agriculture and Fisheries, Australian Wool Innovation, and is supported by AgForce. Leading Sheep's aim is to support a resilient and prosperous sheep and wool industry in Queensland. Now, before we start, I'll do a quick round of introductions. As I said, my name is Sam Harwood, and I work for the Department of Agriculture and Fisheries, and I'm based in Charleville. Our presenter today is John McLaughlin from the Northern Australian Climate Program. You'll be hearing from John shortly. In the background, we have Trish Nolan from the Department of Agriculture and Fisheries, helping with the delivery of tonight's event. It's a pretty warm night here in Charleville tonight, John. How is it where you are?
Good evening, Sam. I'm up in the Gulf, up in Georgetown, and so it's certainly nice and warm. I'm based in Toowoomba now, and so getting back up to the Gulf country, it reminds you how warm it gets in October up here.
Yeah, I think you might have a bit more humidity than us down here, but it's great to hear, and
probably.
And also great to know we have you loud and clear. So I'll hand over to you now, John.
Thank you, mate, and thank you everyone that's jumped online this evening, and particularly promising to see, or encouraging to see those poll results and to see that a bulk of the people on here are in fact graziers, and that most of you are sort of based in the southern Queensland area, southeast and southwest, and then a couple from central Queensland. All the information will be relevant to you. I'll just dive into probably a little bit more detail in the southwest, but certainly a lot for everyone to get out of session this evening. And to jump straight into it, tonight is a seasonal climate outlook for graziers in southwest Queensland. We're going to try to spend just 30 to 40 minutes to provide you with the latest outlooks and forecasts for your area, and allow you to take that information and hopefully integrate it into your decision making on farm, with the hopeful end result of getting more productive and more effective decision making on the ground. So let's jump into it. And I always like to start with this when we're talking about climate forecasting. It's the old adage that a lot of graziers sort of live their life by, work hard and pray for rain. But as we develop tools and better forecasting capabilities, we're hoping to sort of remove that pray for rain part and insert sort of probabilistic forecasting knowledge in its place. Just quickly, what is NACP? You heard Sam mention it before. It's the Northern Australian Climate Program. It's a jointly funded program between MLA, the Queensland Government, and the University of Southern Queensland, and it's part of the Drought and Adaptation Program, or DCAP. It's got research, development, and extension components to it, and so it really handles that whole supply chain of sort of right from the research to the extension side of things. And I am one of 16 climate extension officers, nicknamed Climate Mates, that are appointed across Northern Australia. So that's Queensland, Northern Territory, and Northern WA. I'm the officer for South West Queensland. I'll show you a bit of a map about what that region sort of means in terms of the area that I look after. But if I'm not, I guess, your official Climate Mate for your area, and you notice that throughout the presentation and following on from it, you wanted to get in touch with your local Climate Mate, feel free to reach out to me, I'll pass my email on to Sam, and feel free to get in touch with them for sort of more tailored information to yourself. If you are in Southwest Queensland, please utilise me as a first point of call if you want to query a climate forecast, understand more about them, make sure you're interpreting them correctly. I'm literally your personal assistant for anything to do with climate forecasting. So utilise me as much as you can. because, you know, it's your MLA sort of, it's your MLA money going into it. So make use of these sorts of programs because they're great initiatives for graziers. Who am I, really quickly? So my name's John McLaughlin, as Sam mentioned. In my sort of day-to-day job, I'm the manager of a carbon farming company based out of Toowoomba. We're a service provider that helps people put together carbon projects. Also got a range of industry roles as well in the beef industry. So I'm on the Lucina network. I'm part of the Central Queensland Beef Research Committee. I'm a climate project officer as well, and my background is essentially in grazing extension work, and before that, research with CSIRO. And so I come at this from a grazing perspective, and I can put these climate forecasts into a grazing context. And that is a skill or a capability that a lot of the climate mates have. A lot of them live on property, and they do this as a one-day-a-week job. And so you'll find that most of the climate mates in the other regions as well across Northern Australia are from the beef background or the beef industry. And so we're able to take the information from organisations like the BOM and put that into the context of a grazing livestock operation in a particular area. You might get my webcam off so you don't have to look at me throughout the rest of the presentation. We'll rip into it. So the program, what is our goal of the Northern Australian Climate Program? It's all focused around climate variability. I can't stress this enough. It's essentially a three-stage process. It's about understanding your climate for an individual property, really understanding it, understanding the variability within a climate. And then step three, most important step, is managing for this variability from year to year and season to season. And that's the goal of the NACP program. And managing for this variability ties it all back to decision making. And you know, this isn't an exhaustive list on the board there, but these are the decisions that graziers and landholders either make every day or consider throughout the year. And there's not one on there that wouldn't be influenced to some extent by climate, or in some cases almost entirely by climate. Your pasture growth, your breeder management, when to burn, when to spray, maybe when to put in improved pastures, shifting cattle, selling cattle. All of these issues relate to climate in some way or another. Even simple things such as transporting cattle or transporting livestock. And so we can provide you with the skills and the knowledge and the tools to have a better idea on what you might expect to see in the seasons ahead. Then you can take that information back and integrate it into all these other decisions that you're making on a day-to-day basis. Tonight, we're going to be making an effort to explore the season ahead. Obviously, a lot of people are hearing about dry conditions and El Ninos being declared, and farmers are starting to panic a little bit, and I'm sure if the livestock could read, they'd be panicking as well. And so let's explore that in a little bit more detail and get a really good understanding of what we might expect to see based off the best available tools and forecasts that we have at our disposal. So the season ahead, we're going to look at the latest climate outlooks and insights for summer, essentially, across South West Queensland. And please, as Sam mentioned, throw questions into the chat box. If I don't get to them or we don't get to them, I'll do my best to follow up with them individually and try to address any questions people have. Just to define what South West Queensland is to me in terms of the area that I actually look after, they're not clear lines, but I essentially provide support and provide outlooks and information for sort of anywhere west of Roma, out to sort of Augustella, Charleville, out to Quilpie, down to Cunnamulla. So this sort of area here. As you will notice throughout tonight, most of the forecast maps will have either the whole of Queensland or the whole of southern Queensland in there. But moving forward, if you want further one-on-one support and you're within this region here, I will be your man. If not, I guess I always go Hawaii and Taramanga, so it's quite a big area. But if I'm not your guy after this evening, I will endeavour to find out exactly who your climate mate is, and you can get the one-on-one support from them moving forward. So first things first, when we're trying to understand what the forecasts mean moving forward, we first got to get a really good understanding of where we are today. What is the context of the conditions we might expect in the months ahead? So let's have a look at what has been experienced across South West Queensland over the over the recent history. So quickly looking at 3-month rainfall records for Queensland. On the left there, you've got your rainfall anomaly. So this is the difference from the average that you'd expect or that we've experienced over the last 3 months, and then how that looks in terms of a decile range to the average. So you can see the moment you're seeing yellow across a map, when you're talking about rainfall, you know that you're below the average conditions that you would expect. And so the last 3 months, you can see southern Queensland, southwest, but particularly in the southeast corner, has been well below normal conditions over the last 3 months. And so we can see that most of the areas have been below average or very much below average for a lot of that southern Queensland area. So that last 3 months has been pretty dry and pretty painful for a lot of producers. If we look at 2023 rainfall totals, so we take the last 9 months, 1st of January to 30th of September, we see that exact same sort of pattern. Southern Queensland, southwest, southeast experiencing major rainfall anomalies, and again, below average or very much below average rainfall compared to the northern areas that benefited from a good La Nina year and had pretty bumper seasons to start off the beginning of this year. If we look at the last 12 months, that map looks sort of similar, although we did get spring rainfall across much of southwest Queensland there, that you see a little bit of a retreat in terms of those rainfall anomalies and a little bit more of average type conditions in the southwest of Queensland there due to that sort of heavier October rainfall at the end of last year. And so over the last 12 months, certainly parts of southeast Queensland and southern Queensland that are below normal levels. If we jump back to that 9-month 2023, it's been a really tough year in terms of rainfall. So we know we're in a period, a dry 9-month period and a dry year so far. But if we're going to really explore and get into this idea of drought and the conditions on the ground and look at a 24-month period, conditions have actually been pretty good across the whole of Queensland. And the 36-month rainfall totals sort of suggest an average type condition across southern Queensland with much better conditions in the north there. So we're coming into a dry period of this last 9 to 12 months, but after a few good seasons. So that's important to consider in terms of your own operation, but the broader industry across Queensland. Now, this map is sort of similar information, but it's looking at major rainfall deficiencies. And so we're seeing in the 5-month map quite similar sort of information that reinforces the year that 2023 has been. We're starting to see serious and severe deficiencies in parts of southern Queensland and southwest Queensland. So serious means it's in the lowest 10% of years or the worst 10% of years. Severe means the worst 5% of years, so that darker red coloration. So you can see that we're certainly beginning, even after those couple of good seasons that we had, the last 5 months, and then in this, the last 10 months, beginning to see some serious rainfall deficiencies popping up from the 1st of December to the 30th. And a lot of red coloration. The rest of Queensland's fine. The rest of Northern Australia, to be honest, is fine. It's just this southwest corner and the southeast corner of Queensland beginning to experience much tougher conditions. And that's reflected in our soil moisture maps. So obviously a lot of this information is interrelated to some extent. We can see there that we've got very much below average soil moisture across most of southern Queensland and all of southwest Queensland, with some areas experiencing the lowest on record in terms of soil moisture. And so that's serious. It's seriously low in a comparative sort of in a comparative measure from year to year, going back over 100 years, to have these sorts of conditions across southern Queensland. So serious rainfall deficiencies, and obviously off the back of that, serious soil moisture, seriously low soil moisture levels. And when we tie that in with information from the Long Paddock, which is a Queensland government service that provides useful tools for graziers in terms of pasture forecast and pasture information, we can see on the map there, TSDM, Total Standing Dry Matter. This is effectively a satellite imagery projection of how much feed you have. And this individual metric is just based off a comparative comparative measure to the average. So is it below what you'd usually have at the 30th of September, or is it above that? And as you can see in South West Queensland, I've been monitoring this map from month to month. It was all grey earlier in the year, in the middle of the year, and every time I look at it, we're seeing a lot more red, orange, and yellow popping up across the map. So a lot more below average, well below average, and extremely low levels of pasture, standing pasture on the ground as we head after this 9 or 10 months of really dry conditions. And so a couple of good years, but the last 10 months being rather harsh, and we're already seeing the landscape of the pasture reduction at well below what we would expect to see at this time of the year. And just a quick one, I threw it at the end there, potential grass fire risk. A lot more of an issue across the down sort of country through central Queensland up to the northwest, and up in the Gulf country, a high grass fire risk. This probably reflects more the good wet seasons they've had, the body of feed that they've got up there. And as you get down into the southern areas, you're getting more of the moderate grass fire risk, or in some cases a low grass fire risk, which probably in many cases reflects this very poor, the very poor amount of standing dry matter or standing pastures, because there's simply probably not much of a risk there because there's not much of a body of feed there. And so fire risks probably not the major concern for areas in the south in comparison to the risk that it poses to our northern and central production systems. So let's recap that really quickly. So we have that as a starting point for the forecast that we look at. The rainfall analysis, 2023 rainfall, large areas of South West Queensland are below average or very much below average. The 12-month rainfalls are a little bit better, either average or below average, due to that high spring rain last year in 2022. But then when we look at a 2- and 3-year rainfall totals, we're actually looking okay across South West Queensland and really good across the rest of Queensland. The rainfall deficiencies, 5 and 10 months, we're seeing serious and severe deficiencies across South West Queensland. So that's rather concerning. When we tie that in with the soil moisture levels being very much below average and the total standing dry matter percentiles being extremely low to below average, we're beginning to see a few signs there that it's going to be a tough season ahead, and that the condition of the land and the rainfall deficiencies they've experienced over the last 9 to 10 months could prove difficult in terms of management for graziers. So let's look at the season ahead now. So we know where we're at. We know the conditions we're experiencing in the area. Now let's look at what the forecasts are telling us for the month, 2, 3, 4 months ahead. And the big one, let's get it out of the way straight off the bat. El Nino is now active. And so for anyone monitoring this outlook, it was hanging in the alert stage for quite a while. And I think it was sometime last month that it eventually ticked over to an El Nino. The climate model outlooks suggest this El Nino is likely to continue at least until the end of February 2024. So it's a fairly strong El Nino event that will persist throughout summer. So one of the two indicators that we look at in terms of trying to gauge a sense of pending El Nino or the strength of an El Nino event is our Pacific Ocean sea surface temperatures, our SST, sea surface temperatures, which are currently exceeding El Nino thresholds. So this is one of the indicators they use to call whether it's an El Nino event, a La Nina event, or a neutral event. Anytime it's over this plus, or it's 0.8 degrees over the average conditions in the Pacific Ocean, those are indicating El Nino conditions. And as you can see in September, we're above that. We've been heading that way for several months. And we're going to see continued warming, as it says here, over the coming months. And so until at least January. And all surveyed models indicate sea surface temperatures will remain above El Nino thresholds until at least the end of March. When we say all surveyed models, what are we talking about here? Well, this sort of demonstrates all of the different international climate models from different climate or forecasting organisations across the world. So we've got our BOM there, that's ours. We've got the Japanese, the European, the American, the UK Met Office. So we've got a bunch of different organisations that forecast this. And what I like to do is get information from a variety of sources to see if they're singing the same song, see if we've got consistency and confidence in the forecast. And as you can see, as of November, they're all above El Nino thresholds. If we flick it to March, in this second image, all of these organisations are still predicting our sea surface temperatures to be displaying El Nino conditions. And so there's no chance from this individual indicator of the El Nino event breaking down quickly early on in summer. It's likely to persist right until the end of summer, which means that we expect to see those El Nino effects and the conditions that come with it persisting throughout most of the summer. And this is what that looks like when we're looking at average sea surface temperatures. This is what an El Nino event looks like. For a La Nina event, we'd expect this warm water to be much closer to Australia, with a body of cool water coming out from South America. This is a pretty stereotypical looking El Nino map, with hot water, or warmer water, on the South American coastline and in the Pacific Ocean, and average conditions around Australia. The second tool we look at sea surface temperatures, and we look at the SOI, the Southern Oscillation Index, which looks at air pressure across the western and eastern tropical Pacific. And these two indicators together help us to decide what sort of phase we're in when it comes to El Nino or La Nina. As you can see, these values are also at El Nino conditions. So an El Nino value for the SOI is anything below -7, so a line across here. And as you can see, since sort of August, we've been below those thresholds. So below -7 is El Nino, +7 is typically indicates a La Nina event. The 30, 60, and 90-day SOI values were all below the -7. They were -12.7, -11, -12.2. So we've got sustained indications from our Southern Oscillation Index that we're meeting El Nino type conditions. So what does that mean? So we're in an El Nino. Both of our indicators are demonstrating that there's continued warming still to come in terms of our sea surface temperatures. Our SOI has been below the -7 threshold for 3 consecutive months, 30, 60, 90. So what does that mean for grazers and potentially the conditions they're likely to experience? Well, what happens in winter and spring rainfall in an El Nino year? So this is using averages over all the other El Nino events since 1905. And looking at that data to provide us a bit of an idea of what we would expect. Winter and spring rainfall in El Nino years across South West Queensland is generally in your second decile, so in the bottom 20% of years. And for the whole of Eastern Australia, it's basically below average. So the lighter red is bottom 30%, the yellow bottom 40%. You can see there that whole eastern side of Australia in winter and spring, which we're in now, that spring period, we generally expect rainfall in that second or third decile in that bottom 20 to 30% of years, which is certainly what we're experiencing at the moment. And we've still got another, 1.5 months of this until we sort of get into our summer period. But what about moving forward? What about from October to December, the next 3 months? What do we expect in El Nino years in that sense? And we can see for South West Queensland, we're still expecting below average rainfall, something in that 40%, so that bottom 40% of years. So again, just based off historical evidence, we wouldn't be expecting, average rainfall or above average rainfall in an El Nino year from October to December. What about next year? What about February to March? For anyone that knows much about El Nino or even La Nina, these are weather or climate systems that break down towards the end of summer and their impacts begin to disintegrate. And so we expect far less of an impact towards the end of summer and moving into autumn, which is exactly what this map demonstrates. So by February to March, historically speaking, the effects of El Nino sort of disappear, and we expect, more or less average conditions. So that was focused on ENSO, so your El Nino conditions. We also have at the moment the Indian Ocean dipole having an effect across southwest Queensland. This is the IOD, which some of you might have heard it be referred to as in the past. It is continuing to strengthen. We're in September at the moment, still strengthening. And it's essentially very similar to El Nino and La Nina, except in our Indian Ocean. And all international models we have for the IOD suggest a positive IOD is likely to continue into at least December. And when this happens, when a positive IOD and an El Nino occur together, their drying effect is typically stronger and more widespread spread across Australia. So when you have an El Nino together with a positive IOD, those two factors together cause increased drying across most of Australia, and particularly southwest Queensland. And how does that generally look? Well, looking at winter and spring, because the IOD climate impact generally begins to break down at in December, which is what we're seeing here, that it will stick around until at least December, we begin to break down. And so what happens if we have a positive IOD event in Australia, or we see hotter temperatures that are above normal conditions across most of Western Australia and most of Southern Australia? And then for Southwest Queensland, we're seeing temperatures that are above average. They're in that 7th decile. And so above average temperatures in winter and spring. And rainfall-wise, we expect rainfall to be in the bottom 40% of years for the Southwest Queensland. So we've got a positive IOD happening at the moment, which generally means hotter conditions and drier conditions for Southwest Queensland. We've also got an El Nino happening, which usually means hotter conditions and drier conditions for Southwest Queensland. So these two climate drivers happening at the same time, which essentially have the same impact or effects. So now let's jump into the rainfall forecasts. So we know what sort of drivers are impacting Southwest Queensland at the moment. And so let's see how that is reflected in the forecast we're receiving from the BOM. We'll do 1 week forecast first of all. Almost no rain predicted for Southern Queensland in general, Southwest Queensland over the week ahead. Probably even a glimmer forecast until the end of the month. But, you know, rainfall forecast for Southwest Queensland over the next 2 weeks is next to none in terms of what they're predicting. So a really dry October, coming off the back of 3 and 9 month rainfall totals, which were well below average. It means we've just got that additional month that we're pushing ahead in really dry conditions. But according to the BOM, so this is obviously a BOM forecast, by November, by next month, they're indicating a return to more normal type conditions for Southern Queensland and Southwest Queensland, with the exception of areas right over on the border there. Although this isn't quite being reflected in our northern areas of the state. And this is probably because an El Nino event and La Nina events obviously affect northern areas of Australia, North Queensland, far more than they do the southern areas, and so we're not quite as prone to the influence and effects of an El Nino event or the benefits of a La Nina event as they are in North Queensland. And so we're noticing in November sort of a weaker signal of below average rainfall, so a little bit more like normal conditions. And then by the time we get December, BOM's saying even a bit of chance for optimism that a few areas, maybe around Rome and Charleville, you know, have a better than 50% chance of getting above their normal rainfall for the month of December. And so hopefully as that IOD event begins to break down in December and we move into summer, that Southern Queensland and Southwest Queensland might be experiencing or might get to experience conditions that are a little bit more close to normal. BOM also provides us a 3-month outlook from November to January. And as you can see on that map, and what sort of reflects those 2 individual months, is a 50-50 chance of getting above your normal rainfall in that 3-month period. And some areas down into New South Wales, as you can see, a little bit of even green popping up. So a better than 50% chance of being above your normal rainfall level. But I mentioned before, we don't just look at one organisation or one forecast. We want to get a little bit more information than that. And so I went to the UK Met Office, UK Met Office, to see what they were predicting for the 3 months ahead for Australia. and then we can pick apart South West Queensland from that. They're sort of suggesting for most of Queensland, and particularly parts of WA there, even big chunks of southern Australia, a 20 to 40% chance of exceeding median rainfall. BOM saying, close to average conditions for much of southern Queensland there. UK Met Office is disagreeing. They're seeing something different in their models that is leading them towards suggesting that your chances of getting above average rainfall from November to January is more like 20 to 40%, and the BOM saying more like 40 to 60%. And so a little bit of disagreement in the models there. We can address that later on. We also have the European agency in terms of climate forecasting provides us with a 3 to 6 month forecast, which would take us to February, March next year. Sorry, that's meant to be February to April next year. I apologise. February, March, April up in the top right. And so they're suggesting for South West Queensland a 30 to 40% chance in most areas, or a 40 to 60% chance of exceeding your median rainfall, your average rainfall, for that time period, so that 3 month period. And so not quite as bad as the previous forecasts, but still that lingering indication for areas around southwest Queensland that, yeah, look, there might be closer to normal conditions, but there's still that tinge of a drier influence across much of Australia and areas of southwest Queensland now. So certainly nothing overly promising in the forecast ahead in terms of lots of green across the north. So still a shading of yellow, and it looks like sort of the best outcome is that there's a 50-50% chance of exceeding median rainfall levels for that time, or for that time period. Now, temperature outlooks are closely linked to rainfall for many reasons. In our La Nina years, we generally have cooler days because increased cloud cover, and warmer nights because that cloud cover actually traps heat in. Moving into an El Nino year, we expect really hot days. Less cloud cover around, less rainfall, and sort of with that comes more extreme weather temperatures. This is just looking at November, the month ahead. And this is looking at your maximum temperature, so your daytime temperatures. And there's a lot of red on the map. So high confidence that the conditions, temperature-wise, will be hotter than usual for November during the day. What about nighttime temperatures, your minimum temperatures in November? Southwest Queensland's looking pretty hot still, so hotter than normal nights. Areas of tropical far north Queensland there might even actually experience slightly cooler conditions, which sort of I'm sure they would enjoy for this time of the year. But yeah, certainly hotter nights down in southwest Queensland over the month ahead. Now let's look at November to January, sort of a big chunk of your summer there. What would you be expecting temperature-wise across Australia? Well, it's a pretty emphatic hotter conditions than normal. An 80% chance if the temperatures you receive basically anywhere in Australia are going to be warmer than they usually are for November to January during the day. What about at night time? Essentially the same map, just with that exception in tropical far north Queensland. But yeah, warm nights and warm days for the month ahead and for the 3 months ahead. And so rainfall outlooks not overly promising, and then also higher temperatures likely to persist. So let's wrap all that up as a bit of a snapshot. I didn't want to go into absolutely everything. I wanted to pull out the important pieces of information, not overload you too much, and just see if providing you with these little bits of information might be able to help you with some decisions that you have coming up on your property over the coming months. So to summarise it and provide a snapshot of that season ahead, we have an active El Nino event. And we looked at sea surface temperatures of the Southern Oscillation Index. There are two indicators that go into sort of formulating that classification. Sea surface temperatures are currently exceeding El Nino thresholds. We expect more warming in sea surface temperatures. All of the international models, all 7 of them, say there's still going to be El Nino conditions around in March 2023. So no sign of El Nino going away or dissipating and disintegrating quickly. Our Southern Oscillation Index had 30, 60, and 90-day values that all exceeded El Nino thresholds. That means for each of the last 3 months, our SOI has been at El Nino levels. If you look ahead to South West Queensland, El Nino conditions typically mean a drier period from October to December. Normal conditions, or a 50-50 chance of getting above your average rainfall from February to April. And so as summer continues on, the impacts of that El Nino event for South West Queensland sort of becomes less impactful. We've also got a positive IOD happening. So El Nino events are out in the Pacific Ocean, our IOD is in the Indian Ocean, and it continues to strengthen as well. You'll remember a few years ago, we had a really strong positive IOD event, I think it was in 2020, which prevented the onset of the monsoon, and we actually had the latest northern rainfall onset and the latest start to the monsoon on record. And I was looking up in the Gulf at the time, and it was essentially 6 to 8 weeks later that you'd get your first rain. So when you have one of these really strong positive IOD events, it can certainly limit spring rainfall, and it can sometimes impact the beginning of that summer rainfall. All international models expect a positive IOD to continue into at least December. And so we are going to have sort of this overlapping of two climate drivers that both have more or less a negative impact across most of Australia and South West Queensland in terms of rainfall. When a positive IOD event occurs together with an El Nino event, their drying effect is typically stronger and more widespread across Australia. So we really want to hammer that home. That's what the historical information tells us. If we were to just look at the rainfall forecasts that we looked at, bottom is looking pretty miserable, and so anyone holding out for rain over the next week or two, dare say will be disappointed. Although according to the BOM, November and December rainfall conditions look like getting closer to a 50-50 chance of, getting above your normal rainfall. November looks dry everywhere else in Queensland, though. The November to January forecast, that 3-month BOM forecast, suggested average conditions from the BOM, but then when we looked at the UK Met Office prediction, it was that 20 to 40% chance of above average rainfall. So probably tending towards drier conditions for South West Queensland. So we're seeing, I guess, a disagreement in the model outcomes between our own agency, the BOM, and the UK Met Office. Then we use the European agency's February to March outlook to have a look at what rainfall might be as we finish off summer and get into autumn next year. And they were sort of saying, yeah, somewhere around normal or slightly drier conditions expected for South West Queensland. So not quite a 50-50 chance of above normal rainfall, probably tending more to that 30 to 50% chance. So still an indication that tailing off of El Nino events in late March might still be impacting our climate down in South West Queensland at that time. And our temperatures, well, that was the most clear cut out of anything. November, hot days, hot nights. November to January, hot days, hot nights. So at least that's simple for us to get our heads around. But I did want to point this out in terms of the discrepancy from this BOM forecast with average conditions from November to January. Average is in a 50-50 chance of above median rainfall for that period for South West Queensland. I'm tending to lean more towards the UK Met Office's forecast for this, just based off the historical precedents that we had from El Nino events, with a drier period from October to December, and the persistent positive IOD event, which when it occurs together with an El Nino event, the drying effect is typically stronger and more widespread. So if I was to look at the BOM or the UK Met Office and I was making management decisions and taking into account my risk profile as a producer and as a land manager and as a grazier, I'd be tending to lean more towards the UK Met Office prediction, just to be risk adverse and to ensure you've acknowledged the historical conditions that usually occur when we have the conditions we have at the moment. And so that would be something important to look at, and something that reinforces the benefit of using multiple tools that are available to you, rather than hanging your hat on one organisation, or one source, or one forecast, or one model. But that's a really quick snapshot. In half an hour on a webinar at 7:30 at night, we managed to get a really good idea of where we're at the moment in terms of, the 12th of October, and then what the forecasts are on that rainfall and temperature side of things for the months ahead. And now we want to take that information that we've spoken about today. We want you to take that information and sit down and see, now that you have that information, you've got a better indication of what conditions you might be more likely to experience over the months ahead, and take that into your decision-making process. And take that into decisions about whether to buy more cattle, sell more cattle, get adjustment, wean early, burn, spray weeds, whatever that decision is. Making that decision with as much climate information at your fingertips as possible before you go away and do this. Particularly when we see the forecast that we have seen, really dry last 9 or 10 months, every reason to expect conditions for until at least the end of the year. It's going to have a really important role to play in terms of the decisions you make moving forward over the next few months. I'd like to provide anyone the opportunity to ask questions. I haven't seen the chat. I assume Trish has been monitoring it. But yeah, if you have any questions, feel free to write them into the chat box now, and I'm happy to answer them. Or, as we mentioned earlier, you can follow up with me one-on-one and talk through some of these forecasts and decisions in more detail.
Thanks, John, for sharing your insight to the season ahead. So that brings us to the end of the presentation section, and now we're heading into the Q&A session. I've got a few questions here that I'll read out for you to answer now, John. How often should a grazier be checking the climate forecast?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I started doing this climate work up in the Gulf. I was based in Georgetown for quite some time, and like people that had never been introduced to this before, we had older folk that only just had a computer or were barely sort of able to use these sorts of tools. I think a really good goal starting out is once a month. If you can just start with once a month, think you're in the game, and probably spending 15 to 30 minutes once a month, I think is a really nice starting point. Ideally getting you down to fortnightly. It does depend on the decision being made. If you were considering when to burn, when to spray weeds, when to put in improved pastures or a leukemia crop or something along those lines, you would want to be looking at more immediate forecasts, so potentially weekly, fortnightly forecasts. But for those bigger decisions around selling stock, buying stock, I think that once a month provides you a good enough platform to see what's coming ahead. And then when you've got those more immediate sort of decisions that are impacted about the weather that day, using your forecast tools to understand what you might expect over the next week or 2 weeks can be important. So as a general rule, once a month is great. And then, the more detailed answer would be that it depends on what decision you're trying to make. And so, yeah, that would be my advice on that.
I've got a question come through. Someone would like to know, they said, great presentation, John, and I would like to know who the climate mate is for the area to the east of you, Far Western Downs.
Yeah, so it would be Vicky Main, based in Chinchilla. Great climate mate, been doing it for a couple of years as well. And so we've got one there in that Western Downs region that Vicky looks after, very active in the community there, and I believe a Wagyu producer, beef producer of some sort. I don't want to get in trouble with Vicky if I've got that wrong. But yeah, there's essentially one for every producer in Queensland. So if I'm not yours, I apologise for that, but I'm sure I can put you, pair you with your appropriate mate.
Yeah, that's good. We can surely send them in the right direction. When another question is, when is the most important time to consider the climate forecast?
Yeah, so it does really depend on where you're in or the area that you're in. Up north, I used to always say to people that September, October was a really good time going into their wet season, particularly as they don't handle cattle for the sort of 6-month period from November to March, April. I always work backwards a month from your biggest decisions. And so it can be different for different properties that run different production systems with different livestock. But if you have a time of the year, it might be your second muster for the year, it might be your first muster, and it might be the period before you cull, or the period before you sell, or the period before you buy cattle within the trade game. Months before you have that critical decision to make is the month that you should be looking at the climate information. And so, yeah, it's more of a working backwards from the key decisions you make each year. And most people by now, if they've been on a place long enough, they sort of have their grazing calendar for the year. They know when they burn, they know when they do fencing, they know when they do bits and pieces of other things. And so looking at what that most critical month is in terms of your decision making, and moving a month before that, treating that as the month that you really need to prioritise climate forecast information. Up north, I sort of relating back to your first question, I would say to some people, like, hey, if you can just do September as your month to look at climate information, that's a great start, because I knew that was the biggest month in terms of decision making for their businesses up this way. And so, yeah, a month before you make major decisions on your property, whether that's culling really hard or holding on to more replacement heifers or whatever it is, having the sorts of information we've spoken about today at that time is important.
Thanks, John. I've had another question come through. Would you please share the links to the whereabouts of the UKMO, and where they should be looking, and the same question for the bomb pages that you referenced as well?
Yeah, it's a good question, and we actually have for each of our regions, each of our climate regions. So I've got one for South West Queensland. It's a climate calendar essentially. It shows you, depending on what month you're in, the 5 or 6 most important links that you should be looking at in that month, and they're all hyperlinked. So essentially, you get that document from your local climate mate. It's a PDF document. You go find the month that you're in October, and they'll have already sort of filled in for you, hey, in October, in South West Queensland on a grazing operation, make sure you look at these 5 pieces of information to save you trying to navigate, complicated climate websites and all the rest of it. Just click on the link, it takes you straight to it. And so we've developed that tool or that document to make it easier for graziers. And so either get in touch with myself if you are a South West Queensland person, if you're in the southeast or a bit more in central Queensland, your local climate mate will have that document, and that'll hopefully teach people over time to be able to do all this themselves and not require our assistance to do that. They'll be upskilled and competent enough to find this information and interpret it properly themselves.
Okay, yeah, thanks for that. The next question might be very similar, I'm pretty sure, but where do we go to find the maps and the reports that you've just shown? Is that?
Yeah, essentially the same thing.
Yep.
I do provide a monthly climate outlook, which is essentially, we've done a digital webinar version of that tonight, but I do provide a monthly update throughout the year that puts a lot of this information into a 12 or 15 pages with essentially one forecast per page, with a little bit of my thoughts about it, any questions or queries I have about the forecast, and maybe some advice about what that would mean for their grazing land management. And I provide that, try to do it in the middle of the month every month, to have that resource where people don't need to do this themselves. If they sit down with a cup of coffee or a beer or whatever it is, read through the climate outlook for their region, it should cover most of the important information that they are seeking. So if you're not already on my newsletter, feel free to register for that, and you'll get a very similar sort of sort of offering as to what we've done tonight.
Yep, thanks for that. And for what'll be our last question for the night, can the forecast be wrong?
That's what you think about wrong. Let's jump. It's a good question. Let's go back to here. So, forecasts are essentially probabilistic. And in that sense, they can't necessarily be wrong. If we're saying that there's a 20 to 40% chance of rainfall occurring, or being above normal rainfall here, if it is above normal, that's only a 60% chance, 60 to 80% chance of it being below average, or 20, 40 or 40% chance of it being above the median. And so the probabilistic way is that even if it said there's a 90% chance of you getting more rainfall than the average, that's still a 10% chance that you won't. And so unless you ever saw a forecast that came out and said there is a 100% chance or a 0% chance of something happening, that would be the only situation in which a forecast could be wrong. So what we're trying to do, we're not trying to get the weather or the climate correct. We're just trying to make sure that the decisions we're making are in line with the most likely climate outcome. So if someone said to me that they were going to go and plant some Lucina for the first time, and they were picking this year, and they were going to do it next week, I said, oh, wow, you know, you've got 20% chance of getting any rain next week, and your October to December period is usually a lot drier than normal. The decision wouldn't marry up with the historical knowledge and the forecasts that we have. And so you're just trying to make sure that you're playing the odds in your favour. It doesn't mean that the other outcome can't happen, but essentially we're trying to make decisions that put the odds in your favour. And so providing this information to you means that you might push something back, or it might alter a decision just based off your risk profile for it. And so it's all probabilistic. They can't necessarily be incorrect unless you see something saying 0% chance of this happening or 100% chance of this happening. If not, there's always, you know, that other, if there's 95% chance of rainfall tomorrow, they're still saying 5% chance that there isn't. So in that sense, it can't be wrong, but you might have a situation in which the unlikely outcome happens. And so in that sense, it's a little bit of a game of luck.
Yep, thanks for that, John. I'm conscious of the time, so this is probably where we'll end our webinar tonight. Two quick comments before you go. First one is a reminder that when the webinar finishes today, you will receive an email from myself with a link to a feedback form, and it'll also contain a link to John's newsletter sign up. The feedback link is now available in the chat box if you'd like to complete it, and also along with the sign up to John's newsletter. I've also got a QR code on the last slide here, so you can scan it with your phone. A few minutes of your time to complete the feedback form is greatly appreciated by myself, the leading sheep team, and the Grazing Futures team, and helps us improve our webinars in the future. A big thank you to all you guys for attending tonight's webinar. We had a good turnout, and also a big thank you to John for providing us with all the useful information that we've got tonight. And thank you again for joining us tonight. And until we connect again, all the best, and thank you and goodbye. Catch you all.